It was a quiet evening in a small town, and the family house was alive with laughter, chatter, and the aroma of fresh tea. Relatives had gathered from different places to celebrate a cousin's birthday, and the living room buzzed with energy. Children ran around, their feet tapping against the tiled floor, while the elders sat in a corner talking about old memories. Among them sat a woman named Shabana. She looked very simple, wearing a plain dress and a scarf neatly pinned around her head. She wasn't someone who spoke much in gatherings. She preferred to sit quietly, listening to others, offering a smile here and there when someone spoke to her. Most people hardly noticed her presence because she blended into the background. Shabana's life had always been modest. She lived in a small house, helped her neighbors when they needed her, and spent her days in calm routines. To most people in the family, she was just the simple one. They thought she didn't have much to show apart from her kind manners and silent nature. Nobody suspected that she carried stories and experiences far beyond what they imagined. But that evening, something unusual was about to happen, something that would change the way they all looked at her forever. In the middle of the room, a group of cousins were laughing and teasing one another, and then one of them made a remark. "Why don't we ask Shabana to cook something?" he said, grinning as if it was a funny idea. Everyone laughed. They didn't mean it as a compliment. It was more like a joke, a way to fill the silence and get another round of laughter. Some nodded in agreement, saying, "Yes, yes, let her make something for us. Let's see what she can do." The tone of their voices carried a little mischief. None of them expected her to take it seriously. To them, Shabana was simple, ordinary, and unremarkable. Cooking, in their minds, was not something she would be extraordinary at. It was just a way to pass the time and maybe see her get flustered. Shabana looked at them with calm eyes. There was no anger in her face, no sign of embarrassment. Instead, she gave a small smile. She had spent years in situations where people underestimated her. She had learned to carry her dignity quietly, without needing to defend herself with sharp words. When they laughed, she simply stood up, adjusted her scarf, and said softly, "All right then, what would you like me to make?" The room fell silent for a moment. The cousins didn't expect her to agree. They had only been teasing, but now that she had accepted, they had to give her something to do. After a quick discussion, they suggested she make a simple dish, something common, thinking it would be amusing to see her try. They listed ingredients half-heartedly, some even giggling as they spoke. Shabana listened carefully, nodding gently. Without another word, she walked toward the kitchen. Her steps were steady, and her hands moved with quiet confidence as she tied her scarf tighter, preparing to cook. A few of the cousins followed her, still laughing, curious to see what she would do. Some leaned against the doorway, whispering jokes to each other. The kitchen was warm, with a small window letting in the evening light. Shabana opened the cabinets, looked through the spices, and examined the vegetables and grains laid out. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, selecting what she needed. Those watching her did not pay much attention at first. They expected her to stumble, to ask silly questions, or to look confused. But instead, they saw her moving calmly, measuring spices with accuracy, chopping vegetables with swift hands, and heating oil at just the right temperature. She didn't rush, nor did she waste any movements. She worked as though the kitchen was her second home, every tool familiar, every ingredient respected. She didn't look nervous under their gaze. In fact, she seemed almost serene, as though cooking gave her peace. The cousins exchanged puzzled looks. One of them whispered, "She looks too confident, doesn't she?" Another shrugged, brushing it off. "Maybe she's just pretending. Let's wait until we taste it." They tried to keep their laughter going, but their voices grew quieter. Something about the way Shabana handled the ingredients unsettled their playful mood. As she cooked, the first hints of aroma began to rise from the pan. The spices released their fragrance into the air, drifting out into the hall where others were sitting. Slowly, people began to notice. "What's that smell?" an uncle asked, sniffing the air. "It smells good." More heads turned toward the kitchen. At first, they thought it must be a coincidence, but as the scent grew richer and more inviting, curiosity filled the room. Back in the kitchen, Shabana moved with focus, adding layers of flavor step by step. She wasn't showing off. She wasn't rushing to impress anyone. She was simply doing what came naturally to her. She stirred the dish gently, adjusted the heat, and let the food speak for itself. Her hands carried the memory of years of experience, though no one knew it yet. When the dish was nearly ready, the cousins who had been joking began to shift uncomfortably. They whispered less, watching her more closely now. "This doesn't look like an ordinary meal," one of them admitted quietly. Another nodded, biting his lip. The laughter had vanished. In its place was a growing sense of curiosity mixed with unease. Finally, Shabana plated the dish, arranging it with surprising elegance. She wiped the edge of the plate with a cloth, placed it on the counter, and looked at them with the same calm smile. "Here you go," she said simply. They carried the dish out into the living room, placing it in the center for everyone to taste. The room grew quiet. Forks and spoons clinked against the plates as the first bites were taken. And then came the silence, a silence not of boredom, but of surprise. One by one, their expressions changed. Eyebrows lifted, eyes widened, and lips pressed together in disbelief. The flavors were deep, layered, and balanced. The texture was perfect. It was the kind of food that tasted like comfort yet carried skill far beyond a home kitchen. Someone finally spoke, breaking the silence. This is incredible." Another nodded, unable to stop eating. Murmurs spread around the room. "How did she make this? It tastes like something from a restaurant." Shabana sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, watching them. She didn't gloat, didn't laugh at their surprise. She remained the same simple woman in her plain dress, but now the room looked at her differently. The joke that started the evening had turned into something else entirely, and though they didn't yet know the full truth about her, the first seeds of curiosity and respect had been planted. That night, the family realized there was something special about Shabana, though they couldn't yet put it into words. They only knew one thing: the simple woman they had underestimated had surprised them in a way they would never forget. The family had finished the first dish that Shabana prepared, and the room was still filled with the aroma of spices that clung to the air. Everyone who had tasted it seemed to fall into a quiet reflection, as if they were still processing what had just happened. Some were embarrassed because they remembered laughing at her earlier, while others were too busy enjoying every bite to think about anything else. Children who normally pushed away vegetables had cleared their plates without a single complaint. Even the older uncles and aunts, who were usually hard to please, had nodded in approval. It was clear that what she made wasn't just good, it was extraordinary. But instead of bragging, Shabana sat quietly in her corner, sipping water, her expression calm and unbothered. The cousins who had started the joke shifted uncomfortably. They wanted to laugh it off, but the taste of her cooking made it impossible. It was better than anything they had ever expected. One of them, trying to recover his pride, said, "Well, maybe she just got lucky with this one dish. Anyone can get lucky sometimes." He looked around for agreement, but the others only half-heartedly nodded. Deep down, they knew this was no accident. Another cousin, determined to test her, smirked and said, "Why don't we ask her to make another dish? Something a little more difficult." His tone was less mocking this time but still carried doubt. It was his way of convincing himself that she couldn't repeat the success. The others murmured in agreement. If she could make one good dish, perhaps the second would reveal her limits. The suggestion reached Shabana. She looked up, her eyes soft, and gave a simple nod. Of course, she replied. Without hesitation, she stood up again, tying her scarf back and heading toward the kitchen. Her steps were steady, her face calm, as if none of this surprised her. This time, more relatives followed her, not just the cousins. A few of the uncles stood at the door, and some aunts came in to watch. Children, curious after tasting the first dish, peeked inside to see what she would do next. The kitchen, which had been ignored before, now became the center of attention. She opened the refrigerator, glanced at the pantry, and picked her ingredients with quiet precision. Her hands moved swiftly, yet there was no rush. Every movement had a purpose. She cut, chopped, and stirred with the grace of someone who had spent countless hours perfecting her craft. Her fingers moved naturally, as though the knife and spoon were extensions of her hands. The sound of sizzling oil filled the room. The fragrance of garlic and ginger soon joined it, and people leaned closer, their eyes widening as the smell wrapped around them like a warm blanket. The cousins exchanged glances again. One whispered, "This doesn't feel like watching a normal home cook." Another muttered, "No, this looks professional." Still, none of them said anything out loud. Pride held their words back, but their faces betrayed their surprise. Shabana worked silently. She didn't explain what she was doing, didn't boast, didn't seek their attention. She simply let the ingredients tell their own story. As she stirred the pan, she carefully layered spices, adjusting heat with ease, balancing flavors the way an artist balances colors on a canvas. The room filled with a melody of scents, each note blending perfectly with the other. The children, who had been restless minutes ago, now sat cross-legged at the kitchen doorway, watching her as though she were performing magic. They whispered to each other, pointing at her movements. Even they could sense there was something special happening. After some time, she began plating the food. Once again, she arranged it carefully, with an eye for beauty. A sprinkle of garnish here, a careful placement there. The dish looked like something that could be served in a fine restaurant, not a family kitchen. When she carried it out, the chatter in the living room fell into silence. Everyone leaned forward as the dish was placed on the table. Forks and spoons were picked up almost instantly, and the first bites disappeared into eager mouths. The reaction was even stronger this time. Eyes widened, mouths remained open in shock, and words tumbled out quickly. "How is this possible?" one uncle exclaimed. "This isn't just good, this is extraordinary." Another aunt nodded, her face lighting up. "I've eaten food from expensive hotels, but this tastes better than any of them." Even the cousin who had mocked her the most was left speechless, chewing slowly as if he didn't want the bite to end. His earlier arrogance melted away as he stared at the plate in disbelief. The entire atmosphere in the house changed. What had started as a joke was no longer funny. The laughter from earlier seemed foolish now. Everyone looked at Shabana with a new kind of respect, though they still didn't know the truth of who she really was. She, however, remained unchanged. She sat down quietly again, her face composed, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She didn't glow with pride, nor did she look for praise. Her silence spoke louder than any words could have. Soon, whispers began to spread among the family members. Where did she learn to cook like this? This can't be ordinary practice, she must have training. Maybe she works somewhere famous. Curiosity spread like fire. The cousins, once confident in their little joke, now felt a growing sense of unease. It was no longer a game. They had stumbled onto something much bigger than they expected. One aunt, who couldn't hold her curiosity any longer, leaned forward and asked, "Shabana, tell us, where did you learn to cook like this?" Shabana looked at her with the same calm smile. For a moment, it seemed as though she might answer, but instead, she shook her head gently. "I've just cooked for many years. That's all," she said softly. Her words only deepened the mystery. Everyone wanted to know more, but her modest response left them unsatisfied. The truth still lay hidden, but the respect in their eyes grew. Later that evening, a cousin who had studied abroad took another bite and frowned in thought. Something about the flavors felt familiar. He remembered reading about cooking competitions in magazines and seeing pictures of champion chefs. A memory tugged at the back of his mind, but he couldn't place it just yet. He looked at Shabana more closely, wondering if there was more to her story than anyone had guessed. For now, though, the family kept their questions quiet, choosing instead to enjoy the food and savor the moment. The joke had turned into a discovery, and though the truth hadn't come out yet, it was clear to everyone that the simple woman they thought they knew was not simple at all. As the night went on, the kitchen became the heart of the gathering. People wandered in and out, curious to see what she would do next, eager to taste more. The cousins no longer mocked, instead, they hovered close, secretly hoping to learn something from her. Shabana, however, carried herself the same way she always did, graceful, calm, and humble. Inside, she knew that her years of hard work and dedication were quietly speaking for her, but she had no desire to announce her past or her achievements. To her, cooking wasn't about showing off. It was about sharing love, peace, and a little piece of herself with others. That night ended with full stomachs and restless minds. Everyone left the gathering with questions swirling inside them. Who was she really? How could someone so simple create food that tasted like art? And why had she kept this hidden for so long? They didn't know yet, but the answers were coming. Very soon, the truth about Shabana's life would surface, and the family would discover that the woman they once underestimated was, in fact, someone whose name had already been written in history many times before. The night of the family gathering had left everyone thoughtful. Shabana's cooking was all they could talk about as they drove home or sat in their living rooms afterward. The taste lingered on their tongues, and the mystery lingered in their minds. By morning, the gossip had already spread through phone calls and casual conversations. "You won't believe it," one aunt told her sister over the phone. "Shabana cooked like a professional chef. I don't know how she did it. She looked so calm, but the food was better than anything I've tasted." Within a few days, her name was on everyone's lips. Relatives who hadn't been at the gathering heard the story and were eager to know the truth. Shabana, however, didn't change. She continued her simple routine, going to the market early in the morning, helping her elderly neighbors, and keeping her home tidy. She smiled the same way, spoke with the same softness, and never mentioned anything about her cooking skills unless someone directly asked. Even then, she only said, "It's nothing special. Just practice." But for her family, it was not nothing. They couldn't forget the flavors. The cousins who had mocked her the most were now unusually quiet around her. Every time they saw her, they remembered how wrong they had been. Pride kept them from apologizing outright, but their behavior showed their newfound respect. Another gathering was arranged a few weeks later, this time for an uncle's wedding anniversary. The whole family was excited, but also secretly curious. Many whispered among themselves, wondering if Shabana would cook again. "Do you think she will?" one cousin asked another. "Maybe," came the reply. "But we can't just joke around like last time. We have to ask her properly." When the day arrived, the house filled with laughter, music, and the chatter of relatives once again. Everyone dressed in their best clothes, and the living room sparkled with decorations. But even with the joy of the celebration, a quiet anticipation hung in the air. All eyes occasionally shifted toward Shabana, who sat in her usual modest attire, smiling politely, never pushing herself into the spotlight. Finally, one of the aunts, braver than the rest, approached her gently. "Shabana, would you mind preparing something for us tonight? Everyone loved your food last time, and we would be honored if you cooked again." The way she asked was different from the cousin's mocking tone weeks ago. There was genuine respect in her words. Shabana hesitated for a moment, then nodded softly. "If it would make you happy, I will," she said. This time, there was no laughter, no teasing. Instead, people clapped their hands in excitement. They followed her eagerly to the kitchen, but not with the same mocking curiosity as before. This time, it was admiration. They wanted to watch her, to learn, maybe even to understand the mystery behind her talent. As she began preparing the meal, the kitchen filled with energy. The ants tried to help, but soon realized she worked with such precision that they could only stand back and observe. She mixed spices with careful balance, her fingers knowing exactly how much to add without even measuring. She cut vegetables so smoothly that even the sharpest knife seemed like a brush in her hand. The cousins leaned against the walls, whispering to each other again, but their words had changed. "She looks so professional. It's like watching a master at work. Do you think she trains somewhere famous?" Slowly, the whispers turned into bold questions. One cousin asked directly, "Shabana, where did you learn this? Did you go to a cooking school?" She smiled faintly but didn't give them the full truth. "No, I just cooked for a long time. That's all." Her answer frustrated them because it didn't explain the depth of her skill. But the more she spoke like that, the more their curiosity grew. They were convinced now that there was something she wasn't telling them. The food was served again, and once more the family was amazed. The flavors were so rich, so perfectly balanced, that even the children licked their fingers and asked for more. The uncles, who were usually critical of every small thing, had no words but praise. One of them even asked jokingly, "Shabana, you must be hiding a restaurant somewhere." The room filled with laughter, but it wasn't mocking laughter this time, it was admiration. Later that evening, as the guests relaxed after the meal, one of the cousins who had traveled abroad spoke up. His tone was serious, and everyone turned to listen. "You know," he said slowly, "I think I've seen her before. Not here, not in our family gatherings, but somewhere else." The room grew quiet. "Where?" someone asked eagerly. He leaned back, thinking hard. "When I was in London a few years ago, I attended a food exhibition. They had pictures of famous chefs from around the world, champions of cooking competitions. I remember one picture very clearly. It was of a woman who looked just like Shabana. I can't be mistaken." Gasps filled the room. All eyes turned to her. She sat there silently, her expression calm, but her hands folded a little tighter in her lap. The cousin continued, "I didn't remember at first. But now, after tasting her food and watching her cook, I'm almost certain. She wasn't just a competitor, she was a champion. She had won many times, maybe more than anyone else." The family exchanged shocked looks. The truth was coming closer, but Shabana still didn't confirm it. She gave a small smile and shook her head. "You must be mistaken," she said softly. But her calmness only made them more curious. Why would she deny it? Why would she hide such a thing? The rest of the evening was filled with speculation. The children whispered excitedly, telling each other that their aunt was a secret champion. The cousins argued quietly, some convinced, others doubtful. The uncles and aunts exchanged thoughtful glances, wondering why she would hide such an achievement if it were true. When the guests finally left, many of them were restless, their minds filled with questions. Some couldn't sleep that night, replaying the taste of her food and the cousins' words about the picture in London. The mystery grew deeper. Meanwhile, Shabana returned to her quiet life the next morning. She went to the market as usual, greeted her neighbors with kindness, and lived the same way she always had. But inside, she knew the whispers were spreading faster now. She wondered how long it would take before her truth was revealed. She wasn't afraid of them knowing. She just didn't want to boast. Her victories in the past were hers, but she no longer lived for trophies or fame. She cooked because it was her passion, her peace, her way of giving joy to others. The world of competition had been left behind years ago, but it had left its mark on her hands, her mind, and her heart. The family, however, couldn't let it go. To them, this was no small matter. To discover that the woman they once dismissed as simple might be a 10-time champion was beyond their imagination. The next time they met, they knew they would not rest until they uncovered the full story. The stage was slowly being set. The whispers had begun, the suspicions had formed, and soon, the truth about Shabana's extraordinary past would no longer remain hidden. Days turned into weeks, and the curiosity around Shabana only grew stronger. Every family member who had tasted her food couldn't stop talking about it to others. Even friends and neighbors began hearing the story. She cooked like a master, one uncle told his friend at the tea shop. It wasn't ordinary food. It was something you'd expect from the finest hotels. The news spread quietly but widely, and everyone waited for the next chance to gather again, hoping she might cook once more. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A wedding was arranged in the extended family, and Shabana was invited. Weddings were always full of excitement, bright clothes, music, laughter, and food tables that everyone looked forward to. But this time, the relatives were not just thinking about the wedding. Many of them whispered in corners, asking each other, "Do you think she'll cook again? Do you think she'll finally tell us the truth?" When Shabana arrived, she greeted everyone with her usual calm smile. She wore a simple dress, not as decorated as the others, but there was grace in the way she carried herself. While other women sparkled in jewelry, her simplicity made her stand out in a different way. Children ran to her because they liked her gentle nature, while the elders admired her soft-spoken manners. But beneath all the kindness and warmth, the mystery of her talent still lingered in the minds of everyone present. During the wedding preparations, someone suggested that she should help in the kitchen again. But unlike before, no one laughed this time. Their voices carried respect, not mockery. "If you don't mind," an aunt asked carefully, "would you make something for us again? Everyone is still talking about your food from last time." Shabana hesitated. She hadn't planned to cook that day, she had only come as a guest. But seeing the eager faces around her, she finally nodded. "All right," she said softly, "but only if you all help me." Her words made everyone smile. The aunts and cousins gladly followed her into the large wedding kitchen, excited not only to eat but also to watch her work. The wedding kitchen was noisy and busy, with cooks preparing dishes in huge pots. But when Shabana entered, a strange calm seemed to spread in her corner of the room. She rolled up her sleeves and began, her movements steady and graceful, as though she was painting on a blank canvas. She organized the ingredients neatly, gave small instructions to those helping her, and slowly started layering flavors with care. The cooks who had been hired for the wedding paused from their own work to watch her. They were not ordinary people, they had worked in hotels and catered for large events. Yet, even they could see that this woman worked differently. Her touch was more precise, her timing sharper, her instincts stronger. They exchanged whispers among themselves. "She isn't an ordinary home cook," one muttered. "She must have professional training." As the fragrance spread across the large hall, even the wedding guests outside began to notice. People turned their heads, sniffing the air with curiosity. "What's cooking?" they asked each other. The scent was irresistible, making mouths water long before the dish was served. Finally, the food was brought out. Shabana had prepared several dishes, each one plated with unexpected elegance. The guests lined up eagerly, and the moment they took their first bites, silence filled the hall. Then, as if on cue, praise poured out from every corner. "This is unbelievable. Who made this? I've never tasted anything like it." The relatives proudly pointed toward Shabana. "She did. Our Shabana." For the first time, they didn't say it with teasing or doubt. They said it with pride, as if they were introducing someone famous. Word spread quickly through the wedding guests. People who didn't even know her personally began asking about her. Some approached her directly, complimenting her and asking for her secret. She only smiled politely and said, "It's just practice." But not everyone was satisfied with that answer. Among the guests was a man who worked as a food critic for a local newspaper. He had tasted countless dishes in his career, but something about Shabana's cooking struck him deeply. He walked up to her with a curious expression and said, "Madam, forgive me for asking, but have you competed in cooking competitions before? Your food reminds me of dishes I've tasted from international champions." The hall went silent again. Everyone leaned closer, waiting for her response. Shabana's face remained calm, though her eyes softened with memory. She didn't deny it this time. Instead, she gave a small nod. "Yes," she said quietly, "I did, many years ago." Gasps spread through the crowd. The cousins exchanged wide-eyed looks. The aunts covered their mouths in surprise. Finally, someone asked the question that had been hanging in the air for weeks. "But how many times? How many times did you win?" Shabana hesitated, then spoke softly, almost as if she didn't want to make a big deal of it. 10 times, she admitted. "I won 10 championships." The hall erupted in disbelief. 10 times. Not once, not twice, but 10 times. People could hardly believe it. Even the food critic's eyes widened. 10 times, he repeated, his voice filled with astonishment. "Do you know what that means? That makes you one of the most celebrated culinary champions in the world." Shabana lowered her gaze. She didn't look proud or boastful. Instead, her voice carried humility. "Those were different times," she said. "I traveled, I competed, and yes, I won. But I left it all behind. I wanted a quieter life." The family stood frozen, their minds racing. All those years they had seen her as just a simple woman, quiet and unnoticed, never realizing the greatness she carried in her past. The cousins who had once laughed at her felt their cheeks burn with shame. They remembered how they had mocked her, how they had expected her to fail, and now they realized how foolish they had been. But Shabana didn't scold them or remind them of their behavior. Instead, she smiled gently and said, "Cooking is not about medals or trophies. It is about love, patience, and care. That is all I ever wanted to share with you." The guests applauded her words. The uncles and aunts approached her one by one, praising not only her food but also her humility. The children looked at her with shining eyes, as though she had become a hero from a storybook. That night, the wedding became more memorable than anyone expected. It wasn't just the couple's celebration that people remembered, it was the moment when a simple woman revealed herself to be a 10-time culinary champion. When Shabana left the wedding, people crowded around her, asking for advice, recipes, and stories. She answered kindly, but never in a way that drew too much attention to herself. For her, the competitions were in the past. What mattered now was living peacefully, sharing her gift quietly, and reminding others never to underestimate anyone. Her relatives, however, couldn't stop thinking about it. The truth was out now, and their view of her had changed forever. They were proud, amazed, and even a little embarrassed at how blind they had been before. From that day on, they no longer introduced her as the simple one. Instead, they said with pride, "She is Shabana the champion." And though she smiled politely at their words, deep inside she remained the same, a woman who cooked not for glory, but from the heart. After the wedding, Shabana's truth spread like fire through the entire family and beyond. Relatives who hadn't been present that day heard about it in detail from those who had. Some didn't believe it at first. 10 times champion? Are you sure? They asked. But the people who had tasted her food, who had seen the way she cooked, spoke with certainty. "Yes, it's true." She admitted it herself. We laughed at her once, but she is not just a cook, she is a legend. Within a few days, the story became bigger than just family gossip. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers who had heard about her talent wanted to meet her. People began visiting her home, asking politely if she would cook something or at least share a recipe. Shopkeepers at the market greeted her differently, offering her the best produce, lowering prices, and treating her with a respect she had never received before. But Shabana remained the same. She still walked to the market in her simple clothes, carrying her basket, greeting everyone with the same gentle smile. She never behaved like someone who had won so many championships. If anything, she seemed even more humble after her truth was revealed. Whenever someone praised her, she only replied, "Cooking is my joy." That is all. Her cousins, who once teased her, found it hardest to face her now. They remembered their mocking words, their laughter when they had asked her to cook as a joke. The memory burned inside them like a small flame of shame. They wanted to apologize, but Shabana's kindness made it difficult. She never held it against them. She treated them the same way she always had, without bitterness or pride. Her forgiveness was silent but powerful, and that in itself made them respect her even more. One evening, the family gathered again, this time not for a wedding or a birthday, but simply to spend time together. It was the first time they had seen each other since her secret had been revealed. The atmosphere was different now. There was no mockery in the air, no underestimation. People looked at her with admiration, curiosity, and a little awe. When dinner time came, they all turned to her with expectant faces. "Would you cook for us again, Shabana?" one of the uncles asked softly, almost afraid she might refuse. She gave her calm smile and nodded. "If it brings happiness, then yes." This time, she didn't cook alone. She called the cousins, the aunts, and even the children into the kitchen. "Cooking is not just about food," she explained gently. "It is about working together, about sharing." She gave small tasks to everyone: chopping, mixing, washing. At first, they fumbled and laughed, but under her patient guidance, the kitchen filled with warmth. The children were thrilled to be part of the process, learning how to handle ingredients properly. The aunts admired how organized she was, how she taught without making anyone feel small. Even the cousins, who had once mocked her, now listened carefully, asking questions, eager to learn. For the first time, the family realized that cooking was not only her talent but also her way of bringing people closer together. When the food was finally ready, it wasn't just delicious, it carried the joy of shared effort. The family sat together, eating, laughing, and appreciating not only the flavors but also the love behind them. That night, they didn't just taste food, they tasted unity, patience, and care. After dinner, the eldest uncle stood up and spoke. "Shabana, we owe you more than thanks. We once underestimated you. We thought you were just a simple woman, but you have taught us an important lesson. Never judge someone by appearances. Greatness can be hidden in the quietest people." His words touched everyone's hearts. Many nodded in agreement, and some even wiped away tears. From then on, Shabana became more than just a relative. They began to see her as a guide, a teacher, someone whose humility and talent were equally inspiring. People often asked her why she had left the world of competitions after winning so many times. Her answer was always the same: because trophies cannot feed the soul. "I wanted peace, and I found it here, in simplicity." Her words stayed in their hearts. Whenever anyone faced challenges in their lives, they remembered her. When a cousin failed in his exams and felt worthless, he thought of Shabana's story: how she never showed off, how she quietly carried greatness without needing anyone's approval. That gave him hope. When one of the young nieces wanted to follow her passion for art but feared being judged, she found courage in Shabana's example. If Shabana could walk away from fame to live simply, then she too could follow her heart. Over time, Shabana's story became almost like a family legend. Whenever new members married into the family, they were told about her. "Do you know who she is?" they would whisper proudly. "She's a 10-time culinary champion. But she's more than that, she's the kindest soul you'll ever meet." Even outside the family, her name began to inspire others. The food critic who had spoken to her at the wedding wrote an article about her, calling her the champion who chose simplicity. The piece spread across local newspapers, and people admired her choice to step away from fame. Some even visited her, asking for advice not about winning competitions, but about how to live a life of balance and humility. But Shabana never sought the spotlight again. She remained in her small home, cooking daily meals with the same love she had always given. She never charged for recipes, never opened a restaurant, never turned her name into a brand. To her, the greatest success was not in medals or money, it was in seeing people happy, united, and inspired. Years later, at another large family event, one of her cousins stood up and raised a toast in her honor. "When we were young and foolish, we laughed at Shabana," he said honestly. "We thought she was plain, ordinary, and simple. But she turned out to be the brightest among us. She showed us that true greatness is quiet, that talent doesn't need to shout, and that the most extraordinary people are sometimes the ones who look the simplest." The room filled with applause, and Shabana, sitting quietly in her corner, smiled the same calm smile she always had. She didn't need the praise, but she accepted it with grace. As the night ended and the family went home, the story of that evening joined the many others about her. Over time, her life became a reminder to everyone: never underestimate anyone, never mock someone's simplicity, because hidden within them might be a greatness beyond imagination. And so, Shabana's legacy was not just her 10 championships. It was her humility, her kindness, and her quiet strength. The world might have known her once as a champion chef, but her family knew her as something even greater: a woman who taught them the true meaning of respect, love, and simplicity.